Hello, everyone. This is the Land of Confusion show, the Ricochet show for members by members, where we talk to members. And today, by a special request, we had Brian here in the top corner with me. Wanted to talk about something we both share a hobby of. Is role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons, and thought we'd bring our experiences in. And we brought in a special panel of two other people who are with their camera turned off, but they'll have avatars by the time you see this. And one is Henry Kenneth Stang, who's been on the show before for an interview with me and Don, and a new guest, CU Douglas, who's graciously offered to come by and talk with us for this show. I guess I'll start off with a normal question. So what popped your cherry in the gaming world? What was your first game system? And I guess we'll go with you, Brian, first.
Well, I think like anybody else who's my age, I'm now 51, was Dungeons and Dragons. There wasn't anything else. I remember being introduced to it at church camp. Some other guys were playing and they were talking about the game, and I just thought this sounded like the coolest thing ever. And went home and talked my parents into taking me to West Side Hobby Shop, which over in a little corner had some of these Dungeons and Dragons gaming books. And it just really inspired my sense of creativity. And I got the basic set, and started trying to learn the game, and found some other friends that wanted to play, and we started playing the game very poorly, as one does at that age, but just really getting into it, making up backstories for our characters, and kind of the whole 9 yards early on.
Now, did you start with the white box, the red box? Did you
This is a red box. So the Keep on the Borderlands, so I had the B2 basic module. Pretty quickly started buying some of the AD&D books. I remember spending, just hours reading through the Gygaxian tome of the Dungeon Master's Guide. And here's how you run a game, and here's how magic items work. And of course, it's one of the most poorly indexed books in the history of mankind. So you had to read it.
And Rakshasas, can Rakshasas immediately die if you shoot them with a bolt? No, I'm serious. Is this complicated and this weird? But like, could they immediately die if they were shot by?
My understanding, yes. Certainly playing the Curse of the there was a Pools of Radiance computer game for the AD&D, and yeah, there was definitely a Rakshasa. If you had the blessed bolts, you could kill them on the first hit.
So it was all crazy.
Oh yeah, definitely. A friend of mine, he started off with a white box, and he tells us they didn't have enough dice, so they at the time, and ChessX, which is a very famous dice making company now, basically comes out to make the dice for these games, and his box set came with chits, paper chits you had to cut out, and then you would put in a cup, and you would shake it, and that's how you roll your D20.
Oh wow. I still have my original dice from my box set. They were not well manufactured, so they're very rounded. So, I no longer know how random, random they would be, but I've got them in its own kind of separate dice bag. Is the memorial to the early days.
So how about you, Douglas? What was your first game?
Well, like Brian, I started with the basic Dungeons and Dragons. We had it wasn't the white box, it was the next box set. I would think I was 10, and my dad had introduced us to the Narnia books and the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings. So he heard about this game and he thought it was interesting, and he got it for us, and I was just hooked. I loved the idea. I mean, the first character I ever made was a magic user, because that's what you had back then. They didn't have wizards. And I just had a blast with the game. And I recall this was just we played it a couple years, and then we had to keep a Borderlands and other. We bought other game modules because we thought it was fun. And of course, we were a good Baptist family, and I think some around we hit the what they call the satanic panic now, and we got to the point where a lot of my friends were no longer allowed to play. My dad says, "Well, I understand you enjoy the game, but you can only do so much of it." So that's when we started getting into other games. We played Traveler, which was like the classic hard sci-fi game. It a vastly different character system than Dungeons and Dragons, but I played that. We played some Star Frontiers and
Before we
Gamma
go on, I
World.
just want to point out, Travelers, the character, it was the character generation where you could die before you could actually play the game.
Yes.
There was actually a chance you could die before you play the game. That was part of the fun.
The modern version still has the same character generation, but you're a lot less likely to die in character.
Yeah.
Unless you play, they do have an Iron Mongoose. There's two flavors out right now. The Mongoose 2.0 has what they call Iron Man. In Iron Man, you can still snuff it.
Yeah. But yeah, we played that. I think the oddest one we ever picked up was the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Other Strangeness. We definitely got the Star Wars RPG by West End Games, which is probably the single best version of any Star Wars RPG that's ever been made. And it's gone from there. I think the funniest one we ever had was, considering all the hype about Dungeons and Dragons, was we played Warhammer Fantasy role-playing, which our parents knew we played, and we never really showed them the books. And we put limits on ourselves so they wouldn't understand what was going on, because D&D was actually pretty tame compared to what was going on with Warhammer. That's a beast in its own self, and there's a lot of odd. It's an odd game, and it's one of those that it comes and goes, because it's kind of the redheaded stepchild of Games Workshop. They are a miniatures game company, and they understand they make a little bit off the role-playing games, but they really aren't interested in doing much with that.
But what's funny with this satanic panic is, just real quick, my parents responded by buying me the James Bond role-playing game with Victory Games put out. Which I still have, and it was a very innovative game. First game I saw that introduced the concept of hero points. Easy, kind of fast-paced game, but I thought, you don't like D&D, but James Bond is okay.
Well, he's a corrupt, drunk,
Womanizer.
Englishman, but he's still basically Christian, kind of.
Kind of a whiskey priest.
Yeah.
Before we get to Henry, I'll just say I have a very similar introduction. A kid at school said, "Hey, you want to try something different?" And I tried it, and so I ended up with the red box D&D set. That was really the high value, was really the first thing, but he loaned me a copy of the one before it, so I had that. I read that a bit, and then I ended up with the proper red box, and I still have all the dice from that. How about you, Henry? What was your first taste?
Bang, 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 bang. A door is knocking. And you're like, boom, 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 boom. Get up, get up, get up, get up, Henry. Come on, get your camera. Come on, we gotta go. Come on, Henry. There's a bunch of dead people in the river. We gotta look at them. Yeah, come on. And so I said, all right. And I had to put on my pantaloons, or whatever the English did in the 1920s. And Henry Castaigne, who was a reporter for, whatever the newspaper was at that time in Whitechapel, because he didn't live in Whitechapel. He was born in Whitechapel, and then he moved into Chelsea. Or probably not Chelsea, probably but anyway. A guy who came from the gutter and who through journalism became sort of a middle-class person. That was the Henry Castaigne character. And it was based off of Robert W. Chambers' book, The Court, or the Dragon Court. And so that was my introduction to role-playing. And so Henry Castaigne came out, and he was strong enough to have like a photograph, and he talked to people and he interviewed everybody. And it was Call of Cthulhu kind of the story role-playing, which I'm not very familiar with to this day, to be honest. But the idea of Call of Cthulhu is that you try to figure things out. You don't stab things to death like in D&D, which is awesome.
Well, you may be doing some stabbing towards the end of the adventure. It sort of depends.
Depends on how insane you get.
Well, a lot of it is a highly Call of Cthulhu is very much an investigative game, and it's skill based and not level and class based. So your characters don't go from being nobodies to demigods. They kind of stay at the same power level, generally slowly getting crazier. But you may well be, unfortunately, having to be hand to tentacle with something.
Which that literally happened to me. I was handed no, this was rather intense, and this is why role-playing is interesting. It's not because all these mechanics, it's because of moments that you really care about. And in my introduction to role-playing, my character, he was a little scared because he was introduced to this horrible gangster in London who you could not trust at all. And he knew he could not trust at all. And so he grabbed this knife, the thuggy knife. He grabbed a thuggy knife, and it started whirling. And the knife itself extended and became powerful, and he started killing everybody. Not that he wanted to, it was just the knife compelled him to. And so, yeah, that was pretty intense. And that's what people like about role-playing, is that you can grab a magic item and it compels you to kill people, and you're still like the same human you are before, but then you have to deal with these incredibly bizarre and unusual circumstances. I had a rather more intense thing. D&D is not that intense. Most people, like, I throw a fireball at an orc. The orc dies. I level up. Yeah.
Well, I think it depends. I do think it depends on the game, and obviously different games have different flavors. But you know, I've seen in D&D somebody's character get killed, and they're pretty. This is somebody that they've been attached to for a while, and they're pretty upset about it. And a lot of it just kind of depends on the nature of the game. Like, because some games I think are more serious, and some games are more lighthearted. I mean, it's kind of funny in the game that Dave's running for us, which is kind of a modern Call of Cthulhu Delta Green game. We laugh an awful lot and joke an awful lot, and are really creeped out a lot too. It's funny how much, and I've had this experience in other Call of Cthulhu games. It's funny how much, or interesting how much, that even though it's the horror in a game, it's not real. There's this gallows humor effect that still kicks in. Dave, you've played a lot more Call of Cthulhu, I think, over the years than I have. Is that something that you've seen in a lot of those games?
Yeah, I've seen that kind of stuff happen a lot, because, like, yeah, you're it reminds me of like police officers or other people
Mm.
in situations. You get used to the inuring situation that you're constantly in this kind of mad world where other people might look at it and say, what the hell is going on in here? And there's an old episode of a TV show called Morse, and a person at the beginning of the episode, all the cops and the coroners are standing around this body investigating the situation, and they're trying to like come up with the proper term for like you know, a murder of crows. It's like, what do we call it for when we have a thing like a group of coroners, and then the main character finally hits on body of, it's a body of coroners or something like that, and all the cops start laughing, and then the victim's daughter comes in and hears all this like people laughing over the corpse of her father and gets upset, and the main character apologizes but explains, you know, we're in this kind of situation where this is your extraordinary situation for you, and that's very tragic, but for us it's Tuesday.
Right.
And
Your worst, I've had an EMT say that your worst day is a day at work for us.
Mhm.
So, and what's fascinating, you know, one of the things kind of, I think for me, kind of with role-playing games, is what's fascinating to me, what I like most about role-playing games is that we have a group of people and we have a story, but I don't know what the story is going to be. I mean, I might be the game master and I might have an idea of what the adventure is going to be, but I got a bunch of other players. And I think for anybody who's ever run a role-playing game as a dungeon master or a game master or a keeper, Call of Cthulhu calls them keepers, you know, you may have every idea of the way you think how it's going to go, and then the players come up and just somewhat gleefully blow all your plans up. And I think even like sometimes I've just given them a puzzle and the players just said, well, I think the solution to the puzzle is this. And I'm like, well, that is so much better than what I came up with.
Right.
You're right. You are so right. Boy,
No,
good
that
on
is
you.
every no. That is every DM ever,
mm,
and it's a little difficult, you know. Well, I guess we're conservative, so we can say it affirms that we shouldn't have a central planner because humans are just smarter than central planners.
Yes. Yeah. It certainly is a good emphasis that a bunch of people working together in the right environment can really come up with something cool and different.
Mhm.
And because if I wanted to write a story, I'd just write a story. I love the interaction. I love seeing what's going to happen. I tend to run more than I play over my lifetime. I love playing too. But I really like world building. It's easier to do that as a game master. And I love having a story and seeing what the players are going to do with it and watch them have a good time. And y'all are doing what? Oh,
now I'm kind of curious about something because
Yeah.
I've as I say, I'm going to be 50 this year, so I'm playing a long time, and there's a group of 3 of us, 2 of my best friends, and I think we've been playing the game together for almost as long as I've been playing the game.
That's awesome.
Mhm.
It's kind of interesting because we know how each other thinks in a lot of ways in the way we play. Most of what I do is online with them now. Most of them are back in Oregon, and I'm over here in Utah. But we've had other people join the group, but there's like the 3 of us, and we've got in jokes and things like that, including involving throwing dwarves, which one of my friends threw my dwarf at an escaping goblin, and it worked.
Mhm.
It was but it's interesting. I don't know if anybody else had that, but there's a familiarity. On the other hand, the game still has its own, we can tell our in jokes in between each other, but there's still a point where we can, the game master or the dungeon master will tell us something. We're gonna go, "Ooh, I think we screwed up here."
Yeah.
Mhm.
and we all kind of share moments like this is like back then.
Well, I mean, I'm playing right now, and we've 2 of the games that we have that are live, and I'm doing one online, are with people three of whom I went to college with, one of whom is my wife, Linda, that I met, really got to know in a superhero role-playing game. So she was a tag-along player. She had a different boyfriend who was playing in the game. And she eventually wised up and left him and got with me. And so our current role-playing group here we've been doing it for 17 years. And one of my friends from college moved here. Another one moved. He literally will drive 2 hours from South Carolina to come play with us in Atlanta.
Yeah, it's deeply meaningful. You're a church guy, right, Brian Stevens? I don't mean to be rude, but
I'm a church guy.
Well, you go to church?
Yeah, not quite as regularly as I did before COVID. To cause some disruption, but yeah.
Excuse me.
Well, it was very meaningful for me personally because you do your work for 6 days a week, but nobody really cares about you, and then you go to your DMing thing, and for me it was 3.5 usually. But you go to your role-playing group on that day, and suddenly everyone knows you, everyone cares about you, everyone knows all your shit. And I apologize for cursing.
Yeah, that's okay.
But there's an intense familiarity and community with it. That's like a very big deal.
The word I think fits is fellowship.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And communion. And I think you make a great point, and it kind of goes to some of what you were talking about, CU. You have shared war stories and these shared experiences that really can have had some pretty intense moments wrapped up in them. And it's I think it's not that different than if you're on a sports team and you've been playing a sports game with the same people for a number of years. I think it's a similar sort of opportunity to bond. I mean, I bonded so well, I married one of the people.
Yeah. I have definitely had girlfriends from role-playing games. That's a total thing, especially doing live action role-playing, which probably not going to be doing too much anymore. It just seems to grow out of that habit, other than going to like big gaming conventions.
I don't know what live action role-playing is.
Okay, basically, if you guys familiar with World of Darkness at all?
Oh
Yes.
yeah, I actually did some of that back in the day.
Asimite.
Yes. So a lot of people, it grew out of like a weird situation. I've talked to a number of people who were there from the beginning, and they basically thought maybe White Wolf, who was the designer of World of Darkness, for those who are watching at home and don't know, it's
Atlanta
a game where
company,
you play.
by the way.
What's that?
Stone Mountain, Georgia, a suburb of Atlanta company, by the way.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's certain. Oh yeah, I know. Anyways,
Georgia
World of Darkness
should be on
does
our minds.
vampire, or started off with vampire, and then they had werewolf, and they've created this incredible mythology. But what ended up happening is some people said, you know what would be really neat? We could dress up as our characters and interact with each other originally. And the original idea it was basically a murder mystery type thing. And then that thing expanded into this crazy thing where at one point there was like thousands of people who would get together for like a small game might be 20 to 30 people. Some of them were, and I went to one game once where I was like on Canadian Thanksgiving, and there was 40 people showing up there, and they're like, oh, very sorry, we normally have 100 people showing up, and I was playing a game with like 25 back in Hamilton. And yeah, so these people all dress up, there's a rule book, and you role play out your character in real time with other people, and combat's a pain in the ass, and I would never recommend it for anyone in that game. But that was kind of the and I did that for about 17 years until COVID really could have put a kibosh on it. But I just also felt going into right before COVID, I was like, this has just gotten really stale over the years. But
now what's fascinating is, this is really fascinating. So, and this is what's interesting about capitalism, about humanity, is that No one ordered you to do anything. No one gave you money to do anything. You just all showed up and it was like, hey, we like this thing.
Yeah. Well, and even before White Wolf did anything, you know, when I was in college, we had a chapter of the Society for Creative Anachronism. They created a splinter group, which was Medieval Eating and Drinking, MEAD. I went to Florida Tech. They have a big botanical garden we used to call the jungle, and they'd go out into the jungle and run scenarios, and people would be characters, and they'd have the King's Quest, and whoever, you know, won the quest got to be the king, and different kind of live action stuff. I didn't, they were also part of our Society for Science Fiction and Fantasy, but or had several cross members, but we didn't. Most of the pen and paper people were not also LARPers or live action role playing for, you know, LARPing. But there's been a lot of people since, I think, early on, you know, in a sense, Civil War reenactors. It's a type of LARPing.
They were the original LARPers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so it's the same, you know, I think, you know, and maybe viewers don't, you know, kind of backing up to where did really role-playing games in their modern form come from? You've had war games for a long time with rolling dice, and originally you had war games that were designed to help plot out battles and things. And in the 70s, you had this group that became TSR, who had some war games that they decided, hey, I'm kind of interested in my character. And it went from being moving miniatures around the map in a kind of a war game setting into these characters. And that's really what D&D, Dungeons and Dragons really grew out of, was the initial wargaming, which explains a lot, like hit points and levels and two hit. And once D&D became really popular, right then what you started seeing was other things like when Traveler's a science fiction version, and you know, Star Frontiers was a TSR trying to have a space game. And so the fantasy games have always been the most popular in the United States. And, you know, it's just continued to grow. I think what we've seen today is, I think, thanks to the internet, I think more and more people have been exposed to it. You've got things like Critical Role on YouTube, and people are like, well, this role-playing thing looks kind of fun and cool.
Yeah.
I'd like to do some of that.
It's kind of interesting on the LARP. It's even, there's in Utah, there's actually a theme park now that's pretty much a LARP theme park. It's called, I think it's called Evermore, and they have scenarios and events and storylines through there, and it's been
Cool.
It's still around. It opened up before COVID, and I know they're still around. They've had, and I guess Utah has just not been as strict as other places. But so that's a theme park. Some of the old team of or descendants of TSR, they have a company called Wonderfield. They've creating a theme park in the Midwest they've released a game called Giant Lands, and they're creating a theme park for that as well. So it's something that's pretty strong, and people are actually saying we can make money off this.
Right.
Oh yeah, there's definitely not just the game publishers and writers. There's people who made games that have become rather big. The best known one I can think of is Dystopia Rising, another LARP, but it's basically an idea is that it's set after a post-apocalypse, and you're all like, a lot of people, some people do steampunk, some other things, but basically you're in like this fallout world. Nuclear weapons have gone off, and you're fighting zombies and and people spend 2-3 days fully in character the entire weekend, setting up tents and going off on adventures with each other in the woods. Now, the best place I ever saw, like a few years ago, they actually had a former nuclear missile base for
wow.
sale for $250,000 US. And I was
Wow.
like, if I was an American, I would buy that and I would start one of these games there.
Yeah, that would
There you
be,
go.
I would love that.
Mm.
Of course, I'd be running around in that scenario constantly going, Wolverine.
Yep.
Yeah. It's so interesting too, because it's I think about people doing like fantasy football or some of the fantasy sports. I'm like, well, that's a version of gaming, right? Of course, they're betting money. I'd much rather have the dice be my enemy than how, whether or not some actual athlete gets his leg broken or not. But I love the all of the different kind of games, the different creativity. There's so many things now, ways to do role-playing games where you're not, I remember when I was at high school, it was like, well, how can I kludge the D&D rules into being some other type of game? And now it's like, oh, you know what? There's a James Bond game, and this game's good for playing James Bond. And over here, there's Champions, which is a good game for playing superheroes. And by the way, speaking of the number one, y'all, if the number one game in Japan is?
No, I don't know that.
It's not Dungeons and Dragons. The second most popular game in the world after Dungeons and Dragons is Call of Cthulhu.
Right.
Really interesting.
Of course, the Japanese are more interested in the horror, the rolling horror that is Call of Cthulhu than apparently killing dragons.
Yeah, I have
I
a
won't make
copy
the
of
tentacle joke.
I have a copy of the Call of Cthulhu for Japan somewhere, and in it, the writer who was an American who lived in Japan for a number of years, and he's talking about how one day he was sitting at his desk and he was like during his lunch break reading his Call of Cthulhu manual, and his boss comes over and says like, "Hey, I recognize that. I had it for dinner last night."
Now, it's kind of interesting on the different systems, because the one game that I've played that was probably the most unusual was the Amber Diceless role playing.
Mhm.
And that was based off of Roger Zelazny's Nine Princes in Amber series. And because the idea is you're all playing descendants of these super powerful beings in the multiverse, almost everybody in the world you can beat up. So they create a system where you can tell okay, you're most likely gonna take care of anybody else in this room. If you see somebody you can't take care of, then you notice, and then you have to change tactics. And I played it, and it works really well.
Yeah.
And it's amazingly done amazingly well. The setting is perfect for that rule set. I don't think I could do it with different games like that. It was probably the most interesting one I played, and that was some of my favorite characters came from those.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, and you can do such neat things with different settings. I think the greatest strength of the Storyteller universe was the setting. It's a pity the mechanics that they came up with were so monstrous.
Painful.
Well, and the idea, I remember seeing Mark Reinhagen talk about the game. So, well, we never really expected anybody would try to mix games within the universe. And I guess that made sense in the 1990s, but it's like, are you kidding me? Of course, people are going to want to mix character types in the universe. That's what players do. The problem is, it's like, oh, we're going to have a mixed game. Great. What do you want to play? I'm playing a werewolf.
Mhm.
Why? Well, because I can pretty much, and when it comes to combat, I'll win. And
Or I'm playing a mage because now you're a soap bubble. Poof.
right. Well, no. Yeah, but here's the thing. Well, but it's Storyteller. Here's the thing. In order to turn a werewolf into a soap bubble, the mage is going to have 4 dots in life, matter, and spirit.
I don't quite know what that means, but I do know that I think that limits storytelling. If you absolutely have to have, every system has this.
Mhm.
You need to put in good stats for the things that matter for you to win.
Mhm.
And no one has ever made a system where you can have any number and any stats and like play a functional character. No one ever.
Trail of Cthulhu does an okay job at that.
No. Explain how. Go on.
Trail of Cthulhu is basically it's a point spending system, and you get points divided amongst all the how many players you have, and basically you during the course of because in the end the storyteller does want you in that game to succeed, so you just have to spend the points to get the clues to go on to the next thing, and generally you have enough between all the players. They generally have enough points to solve the plot. I haven't yet to. There's and you don't have to be an extraordinarily like powerful person in that world, though. Our storyteller is running it like that. It's like he does assume that if you're a player character or one of the named NPCs, you have better stats than anyone else.
You tend to be a
Their average
hero.
person, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things I think, and kind of with storyteller Henry, part of what happened, and this is why I was talking about was the problem was they had these different game systems all set in the same universe,
Okay.
not expecting that but the different game systems were not balanced between each other.
right.
So
No, they were definitely not.
yeah. So
And they weren't in second edition either, or in the 2.0 system either.
No.
I'm just going to be back in second.
yeah. So the problem is the different, but players being what they are, well, can we do a mixed game? And I'm going to be a vampire, and you're going to be aware. And it breaks down, and they just seem surprised that would happen. It was just one of those things where it's like, how did you not see this coming?
Yeah, and I think part of the flaw is that, when they introduced werewolf, it was clear that vampires were in that world. It was all together then.
Mhm.
So the expectation for any player would be, well, what if I wanted to be a werewolf and my buddy wanted to be a vampire? We could go in on that. That would work. But then you start the other game systems, like I said, Mage was strangely unbalancing because of all the things that you can do with that. And I always like that one because you can be very creative with just a few dots.
I've run Mage. I so wanted to play Mage. I've never got the chance, but you got to have the right players to play Mage.
Yeah.
Can I talk about all right, this is rude of me, and I do this a lot where everyone's going on a subject and then I try to like take the subject and just like reverse it, and I do that a lot, but I think we should. And
well, why do you do that, Henry? What drives you to do that?
Yeah, I don't know, but I do that. Oh, you're using your psychological BS.
I was making a therapist joke there. Yes.
Are you making a therapist joke? Because that worked, man. Seriously.
Well, I mean, I consider it as a therapist might actually say to a client, I wonder about why you do that, or let's talk about why you do that. But since I'm not acting as your therapist, in this point, it was a joke.
Okay.
Like saying, tell me more about your mother.
No, she's very lovely. Yeah, Freud was weird. But so we can, and it will be wonderful. And I actually really enjoy this about going into how Mage, how D&D, how whatever systems have all these different things. And that's great. That's wonderful. And I love it. And because I'm a fifth E game master, I do that. And so I'm obsessed with all the mechanics, but that's not important. The important thing in D&D, or the important thing in role playing is, why is it so beautiful and good? And I think I can tell you.
Okay, why is that?
I played in like my second thing, I got to experience humanity as Justin Belmont. He was a descendant of the Belmont clan, and he was a devout Lutheran. And I got to like shoot zombies and make friends with Native Americans and Chinese kung fu martial artists. I got to experience things from a different perspective. And it was very beautiful to, so personally for me, my family's Lutheran. I'm not Lutheran. Can't really believe in that, reference my thing if you want to, when I was talking to you. But the idea that God absolutely defended you and defended good people all the time, that was wonderful. And so I got to experience that through role-playing Deadlands, which is actually a horrible system. You ever played Deadlands before?
I own the books. I never played it, but I know what you mean. I've read the mechanics. I'm like, this doesn't work out too well.
No,
But
it doesn't.
and also the universe kind of went dark in a bad way, I thought.
Oh, in the second system, after the apocalypse, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Before the apocalypse, there was this Justin Belmont, and I got to play a character who was a blessed, who had magic powers. He could heal people, he could heal the sick, he could provide food for people, and he also had a gun and a whip. And the reason it was beautiful is because I could experience the world as a different kind of person. And I could experience the world as a Lutheran who God absolutely wants to forgive you and help you all the time. It was very meaningful. And all the mechanics and, well, you could speak like 9 languages. And if all you say is lies, all your language skills mean nothing. So when I played Justin Belmont, it meant something. And that's why role-playing is meaningful. Is because you can think about what is it to be a poor person, or a poor orc, or a poor elf, or a poor robot, or whatever, and you can put yourself inside another kind of thing and be more compassionate.
Well, and having in role playing, and I've actually used role playing in therapy to help people have a different point of view, not as in a D&D role-playing game, but it's like, hey, role play this other person. And I think, Henry, you're exactly right. It gives you a pretty powerful sense. And it's obvious how powerful it is for you. Your nom de plume is your role-playing character.
Correct.
Right. A lot of times when I've used a nom de plume, it's been my first serious role-playing character, which was a D&D wizard named Tsr, and I've used that as my avatar name a number of places. So it's kind of a similar sort of thing. I definitely think it's powerful. It's funny, like in the game I'm doing online, the game that I'm doing online, I'm playing a 22-year-old wet behind the ears graduate FBI agent with 2 other very seasoned professional, 3 other seasoned professionals, a seasoned agent, a special operator who's been at, 17 tours in Afghanistan.
Yeah, something like that.
And a well-respected doctor, ER doctors, medical professional. It's so funny because everybody refers to my character as the kid.
So in Delta Green, the thing you're playing, you're like, I kind of like America. I kind of like humanity. Let's protect shit. basically.
that certainly seems to be the situation that's going on there, especially when the alternative, well, Brian's character did end up waking up one time in a stew pot.
This is true.
Okay.
It was my own fault. I really kind of set things up for me to be there, but I did wake up in the stew pot.
All right, this is hilarious, and I'm sorry, I don't mean, but people who have never played role-playing games before, they have no idea what you're talking about.
Right.
Waking up in a stew pot.
Well,
You
it's not like
everybody should experience it
at one time.
Well, everybody should experience it at least once, I think. I think I did. Of course, I did write it, Ricochet. Lord knows where it's gone. I kept the essay. At cnar.com. It's on my front page if you go to it. But I really I've kind of linked role playing games to like a TV show, and the players are playing characters that are characters in the TV show. And a lot of times campaigns will have arcs. Some of them may be very episodic. This is this week's adventure and we're done. I use the example of Burn Notice. I thought Burn Notice was a good TV show example, but you see it with other things, even a show like Breaking Bad or a lot of the other shows. The players are all, you're playing a character in the show, and you've got this week's episode is kind of this week's adventure, and you get through this week's adventure, and it may be very serial, or maybe this directly leads into next week and it leads into next week, or sometimes it's the B plot's kind of in the background. So in Burn Notice, the overarching series plot was Michael's trying to figure out why he had gotten burned as a spy. Week to week, there was whatever was the job of the week, because they were kind of effectively mercenaries. You saw like Star Trek DS9. You know, you had a lot of kind of week to week episodes, but as the story heated up, there was more of these arcs.
And also capitalism was good in DS9.
Yeah.
I kind of think the Ferengi in DS9 come off as really pretty sly, intelligent creatures who are busy. You know, I think Quark even says in one thing: arms. You can always sell weapons to somebody. My brother, he owns his own moon.
Yeah, the Ferengi are basically 19th century Americans, or pre-World War II America. I think that's a good way to describe it.
Actually, no, the Ferengi are capitalists, period. But they represent the bad part of capitalism, where they will sell anything to anyone for any reason.
Well, that was if you read about the colonial times in the 19th century, the French and British and Germans were always upset because some American would come along and sell the natives a whole lot of rifles. And that was kind of my thought. It's sort of like there's certainly in Space 1889, they kind of mentioned it. Well, you can usually find an American anywhere, and they're either selling booze or guns to the locals against the wishes of the colonial authority.
I approve of this completely.
Yeah.
So kind of getting back,
as does Boss Mongo, God rest his soul.
Yeah.
So kind of getting back on topic. We're talking about some of the things we like to see. I find that I'm kind of counterintuitive to most people I know. A lot of people like playing the character that's better than the average human. You know, they want better stats, they want better skills to start with, and that's why they're the heroes, is because they're the ones that can rise to meet the occasion. I found I've liked it being the average guy who gets caught into something and is slowly becoming the hero because of what's happening and how he's reacting. And that's kind of why I've always liked that Warhammer fantasy role play. Because you start off as you're just an average guy. I mean, you could be like a bartender in there. And and part of the fun of the game is you can choose to randomly select your starting career, and we almost always do that because it's hilarious. And you develop that way, and you become more than what you start with. But at the beginning, you're kind of like average person who suddenly realizes the world is a lot more dangerous and deadly than he ever realized, and you have to do something about it. And I've always liked that.
I certainly agree with that, except for in second ed, where every bartender usually was a retired 10th level fighter adventurer with a broadsword +1.
Right.
But that was
Well,
just,
that's true.
but then again, that was the Forgotten Realms.
Well, sometimes you have to do that so that the town, when everybody in your town is, all the NPC, non-player characters in the town are retired level, 15 characters, the PCs can't go all murder hobo on the entire town. And just,
Mhm.
That's kind of what they did in World of Warcraft in this one town, where they made guards super powerful because the other side kept killing the entire town.
Yeah. I will say Call of Cthulhu, a straight Call of Cthulhu game, while the game does tend to make the characters probably more educated and intelligent than average, just with the way the system, the dice are kind of set up to roll. You can play all sorts of, the professions are as basic as you're a hobo, if you're playing in the 1920s, all the way up to being, a psychiatrist. So
For someone with a credit rating of 99.
yeah, which is what's fascinating to me too. Sometimes it's like when you talk about how games work differently like that, there really is kind of a neat thing to say, well, yeah, you are a bunch of nobodies, and then you get the call to adventure, and you go out and you turn into something.
You turn into Abraham Lincoln.
Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Slayer.
Yes. My grandfather was, back in his day, he could have beat up Captain America.
Okay.
So he was a poor white nobody.
Mhm.
And then he had to defend the all of humanity, and he did. And he absolutely kicked ass. And that was wonderful and great.
So what is everyone's favorite role-playing game? Not just necessarily the one they play a lot or what happens. So it's everyone's favorite, I guess.
I would say the one that I played a lot of, and my favorite is 4th edition Hero System. It's not one of the biggies, but it is. We did a lot of it in college. It's a point-buy system. You can use it to play any genre. I think it's superior to GURPS.
Well, it's easy to be superior to GURPS.
So, but it very much you can do anything with it. Now, that being said, the weakness is you've got to know how to use it to build anything, to build it. But it's been my favorite. And if you said you can only do one game system, that would be the one that I would stick with.
How about you, Henry?
I would start with 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, but you have to have 2 classes. And they don't do that in D&D. And I think that's wrong. I think you should have like, oh, I'm a fighter, and I was really into nature, I was really into this religious thing, or turns out that I have a magical heritage, and then you go into sorcerer or whatever. I'm into 5e because you can hang out with other people to if you're 5e, 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, then you can like talk to other people. Like, hey, what do you think about my build? What's your deal? And you can talk, you can engage with different people. What do you think?
How about you? See you, Douglas? Or maybe he's off taking care of you. You mentioned he
No,
has.
I'm back. I'm back.
Okay.
Well, I probably have two favorites. I already mentioned Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, which is kind of punishing myself because, like I said, GW really just kind of pulls the carpet from its players every so often. They want to keep their miniature games going, and they don't care as much about the role playing. But like I said, I love the aspect that you are, an average person kind of becoming something more. And it's a very dark
awesome.
game. It's a very dark game, and it's there's consequences in there that I enjoy a lot. And like I said, we have these moments where we're just laughing out loud, and we have moments where it's like, oh no, I did that. I think my other favorite is on the other end of the spectrum would be Tsr Star Frontiers.
Okay.
I like that one. I played Traveler and Star Frontiers. I like Star Frontiers a little more because there's a little more aspect to being a hero in that. Traveler was a kind of a confusing system, and I didn't always see how to make an adventure out of it as much as more of a scenario. But Star Frontiers definitely helped me get that, and I think it had a much more fun with the aliens in there, where you could actually interact with them. Traveler, the aliens tend to be just too inhuman to deal with.
All right. Let me rephrase my thing very quickly. Strands of Fate, actually Strands of Fate or Strands of Power. And Strands of Power is better for LoC, and that is really the best system. No, I'm very serious. Like, there's this.
I'm not familiar with it. That's all.
That's okay. I think it's the best system for everything.
So you said Strands of Power, Strands of Fate. So it's built off the Fate? Is it built off the Fate system?
Oh, okay. At least I've heard.
No,
of
the
that.
early Fate system,
Okay.
the one that was good. I know I'm going there.
I'm just crunchier. I'm just crunchier than that, and I like more crunch in my games than that.
Strands of Power, because Strands of Power there are problems with Strands of Fate that did not work, and Strands of Power resolved that, and it was better. Strands of Power was better. And you could make any character you ever wanted, but you actually had to care about the plot and everything. So it was the best thing.
Well, for me, I have two kind of favorites. The mechanics are not great, but I love all the lore that was developed out of it, and that is the D6 Star Wars system. That one's got so much stuff going for it, but yeah, the mechanics are terrible. But it's great for individual adventures, but they eventually get kind of too powerful too quickly. Kind of reminds me of the original 7C had some game-breaking things, really good ideas, but didn't really think through it. What's the other one I was really liking? My favorite system. When I played it and I ran it as a LARP. So this is the Mage, the Awakening
I've never
system.
played a Mage. I want to play the Mage game.
Okay. So this one's slightly different than the one Brian was talking about earlier. So this is a second edition thing, but this one called Mage Awakening, I've had so many good things and so much fun running it for, like, I ran a 5-year chronicle and I had so many things and stuff that happened that I ran a convention game for like 100 people over 2 days. And the results of that convention game really prepared me for COVID. I can tell you that, because I got to see what people would react like. Normally in most of these World of Darkness games, players are either it's the end of the world and players just don't think the storyteller's ever going to pull the trigger on it. And I'm like, I set the perfect right amount of stakes in the situation where I was like, look, I can pull this trigger if you players don't solve this problem. And there will be consequences for all your characters if you don't solve it. They managed, so they got real passionate about it. And I basically created a magical refugee crisis. And some players were like, oh yeah, we'll help this out. And other players are like, we just need to machine gun these refugees as they cross the border, was the response to the situation. And I just saw how all these people who are in real life liberals, suddenly when it was they were faced with consequences or devastating choice to them, when it really mattered to them, suddenly they were willing to embrace all sorts of tyrannies that they would not be willing to do otherwise.
Okay.
Cool.
I will talk about that if you want.
Sure. Yeah.
All right. So apparently torture is the worst thing ever, but apparently it works if you're a monk and in 3.5 D&D, and you just punch you punch a guy until he so the super socialist dude I knew who will remain nameless because I'm honorable, but the most left-wing guy ever is like, oh, let's punch a guy. And he played a monk, and he played a great monk in 3.5 edition, and he just punched him. If someone was bad, he just punched him until they confessed what was true.
Was this a mechanical effect that allowed them to do that?
No, it wasn't a mechanical effect. It was role playing, and what happened, everybody else was also left wing, and they were like, "Yeah, that works."
You just punch somebody to. So Kurt, y'all see some of the stuff I put on to Ricochet, but in the Kingmaker game, Pathfinder Kingmaker game that I'm playing in, where I'm king, we have converted a group of kobolds, lizard folk, centaurs. I even have a little harpy experiment going on. We'll see, that may not pan out, but we've run into these kind of classic humanoid species and incorporated them into the growing kingdom, because it's like, well, what are we going to do? We're just not going to slaughter them all. And so it's kind of interesting that, and we're all good friends. We're all conservatives, but we're all like, well, we want to have this. I don't think we think about it as a multicultural kingdom, but we kind of think about it as everybody gets to be a citizen, well, subject. It is. I am a king, but people get to be subjects, and I have nobles. I have centaur nobles and kobold nobles and lizard folk nobles. They have representation in the House of Lords. So it's kind of interesting. You talk about politics. Maybe I'm being, I guess the sort of conservative we're being is what, 15th century conservative here.
Yeah, you sound like a 15th century, like classical liberal.
Yeah. Well, we're definitely we're not really constitutional monarchy, but there's a parliament.
Did you ever play Birthright?
I've
which
not
is
played
second
with-
edition D&D, where every player or at least one player usually starts out as a king or like a successor state kind of situation. And it had king building rules. Now looking back on the rules, didn't like work. And that's a major problem often with some of the supplements out there. But it was just kind of a fascinating thing where basically a bunch of gods nuked themselves to prevent like one evil god from conquering all of this continent. And as a result, a bunch of people became the new gods, but a lot of people just got a bit of the god stuff in them, and they could go around and that gave them the ability to rule the land in a way. So they got actual magical powers coming to them because they were this kind of situation. And you could go around stealing like the other guys magical powers, Highlander style. But instead of the head chop, it was if you stuck someone in the heart with the right weapon, you could gain their
goodies,
their god stuff.
Yeah.
Now, what do the lower class people think of this? We're like, oh, I'm thinking of Qin Shi Huang in Chinese history, where, oh, the guy who wins is the most brutal, disgusting, horrible warlord. And I'm going to clap for him, but I kind of know that he's a monster.
Well, what would happen, actually, that was one of the other instances of interest of that world, is that there was the evil god's bloodline, and that's what they all called them. So people had bloodlines, derivatives from whichever god that they were close to. The evil god bloodline, if you got too much of his stuff, it would corrupt you and to make you into a monster. So that was one of the problems. But for the most part, the faith, like you had faith, guilds, law, were the three kind of and sources for magic users. So you could cast incredible, powerful spells via these powers, and you could do some other stuff. But for the most part, it was a typical fantasy world. You're not really thinking too much about what the peasants think of what's going on in this world. But my friend Mark, who Brian knows, is a big fan of this game, and he, of course, thinks about all those things because that's what Mark likes to think about.
Gnosis, a friend of mine, he cared about the peasants, but he cared about the peasants while he was like kind of drunk, and by kind of drunk, I mean pretty drunk, in the backseat of the taxi, waving at them.
Okay. What else is there? So we've been talking about our favorite role-playing games. What game have you ever? I've had this situation where I bought games and never even got a chance to play them. What game have you guys ever wanted to play but never really had a chance to?
Moza.
Changeling? Definitely, I would. I want to play so bad. I've got a character who's a satyr and he's a singer. And anyway,
Marvel thing.
Is that the classic old Marvel from TSR, or is that something more new?
I honestly don't know, but I love superheroes a lot.
Well, I know Champions is one that a lot of people like. I understand mechanics seem to get kind of bogged down, but Brian, you've probably played that, so.
yeah. So Champions, it's the hero system is Champions, and so yeah, it's a fantastic superhero game. It lets you do all sorts of things, point levels, and, easy. It's all a D6 mechanic, so you only got one set of dice, and it uses a 3d6 roll for its all of its rolls. So it's a nice bell curve. So it was originally designed to be a superhero game. That's what it does best. I'm looking. Of course, it's in this room over here are all of my books.
over here are a lot of my books, but I have books over there and all over the place.
So I've picked up years ago. I picked up Aces and Eights, which was by Kenrico. It's a Old West RPG, and I've always wanted to try that, but I have never had an opportunity to actually spring it on anybody, and over the years things have changed a lot, so I haven't been able to bring it out. But I've just wanted to try that one.
I love that. I've never done a Western game. I've always wanted to either run a Western game or play.
I encourage you to do it.
Well,
Deadlands.
Well, the Western game I'm going to run when I run it, and I've got the book and I'm ready to go. I've just got to put the audience together. But I promised this to my friend Matt, who's running us through Masks of Nyarlathotep in Call of Cthulhu. Is the Call of Cthulhu? I think it's called Deadly Trails.
Yep.
Is their Western, and they've got a Western campaign. So my goal is to run that at some point in the future.
Yeah, the closest I've done so far. Oh no, I've done a Western once. It didn't last very long. Then I ran another game in the same kind of universe that lasted about a year, or in the same town, and had a lot of callbacks to that one, which was a World of Darkness game called My Lazarus Campaign, set in Lazarus, New Mexico. And that one was set in the 20s, and I've always intended to run the game again in the 50s as my third part of that campaign.
Oh, I like that, yeah.
But I haven't had a chance to do it yet, and COVID and a lot of the players but some people say it's my best game mastering I ever did was that particular campaign. Certainly there was.
How do you? No. They're right. It's not. So I'm doing some good game mastering myself. And I feel like I'm accidentally into it.
Yeah, so for me, it's like when I've had a conversation with people over the year, and it's just like, how do I learn to challenge and channel this stuff? Because people come up to me sometimes later after I've done something, and they're like, oh my God, I can't believe you did that, or you're so cool, or this kind of thing. And I'm like, oh, when I'm subconscious, when I'm not thinking about it, it can be really great. But when I try to concentrate and think about it and channel it for my own ends, it doesn't work. But yeah, that was one of the things. The only other time I'm running right now as a Western is some friends of mine want me to run the Fallout role-playing game. We've run one session so far, and who knows when we'll run another session. But I've recognized that some of the Fallout stuff is basically a Western by now.
Right.
For games I've always wanted to run. Just looking over here. I've run a lot of these games, but I've always wanted to. I do want to try the new Star Trek role-playing game by Decipher, which is similar to the Fallout campaign. And I've always wanted to run a Stargate campaign. I have stuff written up.
Oh,
I've never had a chance to get the players together.
Stargate so lends itself to be an RPG.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember watching Stargate going, okay, this is a role-playing game.
Yeah, you have the classic adventuring party.
Yeah.
You know,
and they save the day. Well, it's kind of like, Chris, the joke is Josh Whedon played Traveler when he was younger. And you look at Firefly and you're like, this looks like a Traveler game to me.
Yep.
That was when Guardians of the Galaxy came out. We, all of us and our friends said, this is like an awful collection of characters. The GM said, we're going to do a space game. And, it's like, okay, what are you playing? I'm playing a raccoon. You're playing a raccoon. Okay. All right, fine. What does your raccoon do? Oh, he blows things up. Great. Okay. I just pictured this put upon GM with this.
Did the raccoon say, hey, I've been screwed over, I've been hurt, I've been So I'm blowing things up because of this shit. And
I, my
it's-
experience with the player who's big into the pathos of their character's background is not usually the one that builds somebody who blows things up.
Yeah, yeah, no, I agree with you on the idea of some of these things are definitely, it's like, this is someone's D&D game that we're watching here being paid out with $200 million of special
and this
effects.
is why I like well, this is why I like Western stuff. It's like, hey, a lot of things horrible happened to me. I'm gonna ask you to help me out, and that's it. I'm just
Okay.
gonna ask some fair stuff. This is Alexander Voyager.
Well, I think it's kind of interesting because I've got a player who tends to build characters who have dark backstories where bad things happen to him, like 17 tours in Afghanistan.
And I do that too, but
oh, I never would have guessed that, Henry, based upon our conversation.
that's fair.
So yeah, I think I think as players we have some tendencies to the sorts of characters that we might like to play. And it depends on the games. In the more heroic settings, my wife usually likes to play a melee, let me get in and beat people up. I know that for me, if I don't go out of my way to play a character who's not the leader, the other players will tend to let me be in charge. So thus I might, you know what, I'm going to deliberately play the youngest character in the group.
Well, I didn't think that was going to be a problem in the with Mark at the table.
Yeah. But yeah, so I think that, but that's part of the fun, right? In one game, it was we're in a Waterdeep game, and I'm playing a big dumb paladin. Now, the game master, I talked to game master and letting me combine my leadership feat. We started at higher level leadership feat when my summon mountain, and he let me summon a griffin. And I'd just fly around the board. My poor rogue would finally, I'd be beating on somebody, he'd get in a sneak attack, and then oh, you're here, that's great. Let me go engage somebody else. But yeah, it's been a big part of my life, and I've finally gotten to the point where working on a role-playing game or the kind of getting back to your point, Henry, about the fellowship or the communion of it, or see, you're talking about the same people you've been playing with for ages, and David, I know that you're playing with the same people.
We're not playing with them anymore, but whatever.
But the sense of getting together with that group and exploring and pretending. I feel bad for the normies who don't get to have that creative experience anymore. And it's nice to feel like at 51 I still have access to the same creativity I had when I was 10. And I can share that with other people.
No, respectfully, that's insane and beautiful.
So I think role playing, I'm glad to see that more and more people are doing it. And however it is that they do it, and whatever version they might be, hey, we get together and kill people, and it may be we like to run a deep, heavy, pathos-driven game, whatever works for that group and those players.
All right, so I'm going to. I gotta go. I gotta sleep because I have work in the morning.
Yeah, no problem. But I'm glad you were able to come by.
I'm going to say something rather controversial.
Okay.
I played a dude named Alexander Voyager, who was a partially African American dude who was a slave, and And so I had to research like how much it cost to free a slave in 1960s America. Or 18, yeah, I'm sorry,
Yeah, 1860s America.
Yeah,
1860s America, yes.
Yeah.
So I play this black dude, and it was very informative because everything was like, I need to get ahead, I need to make enough money, and I need to and that was his thing. And in our current culture, you're not allowed to pretend to be a poor person. You're not allowed to pretend to be a black person. And it made me more compassionate, more empathetic to be this Alexander Voyager, where it's like, all I want to do is work as hard as I can to free my family from slavery.
Mhm.
That was Alexander Voyager.
Cool character concept. I like.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
And he absolutely did that all day and every day. And now you're not allowed to do that. But anyway.
I think it depends on your role playing group. We definitely could have that in one of our.
Oh yeah,
our
same here. But yeah.
Yeah.
Talk.
And his master was a black dude. By the way, you're going to get canceled for this. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
Oh
But-
man, dude, I've already been canceled. Oh,
Okay.
one of the reasons why I can't play in my LARP groups anymore is because of stuff like this.
Why?
I can't go into all the details because it's a lot of personal stuff. But yeah, one of the reasons I do remember, like, someone yelled at me, "How dare you bring up the fact that Boogaloo Boys and Antifa as characters in your game?" And I'm like, "Did you get permission from your higher ups to have this thing?" And I'm like, "They're burning down cities in the United States of America. This is supposedly the world of darkness, but I cannot
Yeah.
talk about current day politics
Okay.
anymore." I mean,
All
like,
all right.
See,
that was not the
and
reason
what
why I was kicked out, but it was the reason I quit.
what I want to do in a game, what I would have liked to have seen in a game, is in a World of Darkness game. Though this could work in Call of Cthulhu, I'd love to see have put in Antifa versus Juggalos.
Oh, yeah.
But in a world where
That
magic
would
is
be
real,
so fun.
in a world where magic is real, so that
Oh, wow.
could be really creepy and awful.
Mhm.
Yes.
And that's the sort of weird stuff we do in our games. You know, I did that in a mage game where it's like, well, my little neophyte mages needed to retrieve an item, and it was in a museum, and no problem, we'll go into the museum in the middle of the night because nobody will be there. Except in the middle of the night was when all of the art-loving vampires could go to the museum in peace. And they broke into having a bunch of vampires because I thought that would be, funny.
Well, for me, the one I always thought would be an interesting game I've thought of doing for vampire is the one set in a zombie apocalypse at the beginning of the zombie apocalypse. Because you're the vampire and you have to feed on humans who
Yeah.
I
are
have a
gradually
native
being
Mary-
turned into not edible food. So you have to figure out how to keep your blood supply alive.
Protect
Yeah.
the herd.
Now, in the World of Darkness, the place I always wanted to try to check out, because I didn't get much into werewolf because of the whole greedy theme, but I always wanted to try it in Russia, because when Russia, the government fell, you got wind of all the stuff that they did there, and just how bad the environment really was in Russia, or the Soviet Union, that basically was being hidden for so long, and the whole game, it made sense in that context.
Hmm.
It's like you you could play that and you could just see how bad a corruptive government is and what it does, and that would be interesting to play, I think.
I
No,
agree.
well, I'm going to advantage Demons by Scott Yenoe. Sorry, I'm from Boise, Idaho, and
Okay.
I know this professor, and he is solid. And I think it's great. Continue.
Okay. Well, we've been talking about an hour and a half now. So is there like maybe I'm thinking we might want to get on with our evenings. But I was just wondering why don't we have like each one of us kind of give out like one like last hurrah, like what if you want to convey to someone who's never played before why they should play? Well, what do you think is the thing that you want them to think about there? Well, or what would you say to get someone to play there? See you, Douglas.
Extreme. I'm gonna say extreme stuff.
It the one thing I've always liked, and remember, I'm speaking to someone who's had friends doing this for a long time, is there's camaraderie at the table. If you do it in person, there's a real camaraderie at the table, and it is fun to work together to meet a goal, and to do that creatively. And everybody who is added to the table has a different way of thinking that makes the game interesting.
How about you, Henry?
It's really complicated. I think you should do it. Yes, there is a camaraderie, but there is also an idea that you have to go forward. We don't have enough time to talk about this tonight, but the best argument I've ever heard for role-playing was about where we're trying to live in the most intense version of God's mercy. I know that sounds weird. It's true. I'm not lying to you. So, never lie, and I'm trying to understand everybody else. Yeah, that's it. Done. Next guy.
I
Okay,
think,
night.
like,
How about you, Brian?
I think I definitely can sign off on the communion, the intensity of the experience. I would say it is an opportunity to stop worrying so much about your self-image and let go a little bit and get back in touch with some of the magic of childhood. I think we could all use a little bit of that magic of childhood, and role-playing games access the exact same thing, the exact same energies that you access when you lose yourself in a great movie or a great story or a great book, except instead of watching other people run around and do these things, you get to do them. You get to have a character doing them, and it's just, it's an experience transporting you to another way of being. It's very exciting.
For me, looking back on it,
Beautiful. Transporting to another way of being. Beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah. I guess for me, I'm going to answer a bit from the game mastery side of things. When I'm running a game, if I'm doing my job right, I think my players have agreed with this when I explain it to them. Basically, I want my players to be John McClane at the end of Die Hard, having gone through this incredible, crazy experience and adventure and barely surviving and looking back at what they've gone through and say, I can't believe I survived all that crazy stuff. Whew. Now can I ride off into the sunset? Right. That's what I think players really should experience when they've been through proper game. And the only other thing is it's a way to really experience and explore the human condition in a way that, you know, actors talk about when they take on a role. And this is the you have the same thing with a role-playing game.
All right. We need to talk about this again, and we need to talk about it from an intellectual actor perspective.
Yeah.
Next time.
We can definitely have we've definitely had multiple sci-fi show panels. We'll definitely have another RPG panel.
RPG panel. Yep. Sounds good. Well, it's
That'd
been
be
a
great.
good time, guys. I've enjoyed it.
Yep. Same here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And our next episode is we're still trying to work it out. I was hoping to do it next week, and then my guest Doc Bastiat's like, you do know what week it is. I'm like, what, is there some sort of weird American holiday that I don't, as a Canadian, don't know anything about that's happening next week?
Oh, okay. Oh, all right. Doc Bastiat is the Chad, and he should have rights above other people.
Yeah. So right. So we're hoping to see him the week after for an interesting debate between me and him, being hosted by Flickr, where we're going to talk about where the world's going in the next few years. And I'm a bit more of an optimist, and he's a bit more of a pessimist. So that's what I guess there will be the optimism versus pessimism.
Dr. Bastiat is right because he's genetically superior.
I need all the optimism I can get. I tune in and I hope that you win.
Hey.
Okay.
Hey.
Your conversation with Flickr last week already made me feel a lot better with your thousands of conspiracies. So
yeah, it's like when you realize it's like there's thousands of factions out there competing against each other, and sometimes they're winning and some groups are losing. That's a bit much more, I feel, realistic than thinking there's one overall conspiracy. Is just,
right. And that made me and putting it into perspective with the my Call of Cthulhu experience, it worked well.
Mm.
Also, I appreciate the name drop.
Oh, no problem.
It
okay,
is
well,
weird,
I'll
Coach
see you guys later in the comments on Ricochet.
Yeah. All righty.
Okay, bye-bye.